Okay, so in the last video, we just introduced the definition that Langer gives to art, and we talked a little bit about form perception, and we will come back to that, and of course we will continue to unpack her definition of art. Um, but we mainly focused on logical form, the idea of logical form or abstract form, and I want to pick up with that. So we said logical form, structure, articulation, a whole resulting from the relation of mutually dependent factors, the way that whole is put together. And we've seen that form here is abstractable, that it can be extrapolated from an object and conceived as being the form of another object, right? We saw this with the lampshades in the department store where, you walk in there and you see this lampshade, but you need a different color and you need a different size. And so in your mind, you say, all right, I like that form, so I'm going to ask the clerk here if they have the same lampshade, and you mean the form of that lampshade, in a specific color or size. So you've abstracted the form of that object, and you've tried to convey to the clerk you want that same form but in a different color or different size. And what we're seeing here with Giacometti and his activity in sculpting his wife here is, well, we'll go back here, is what we find is he's expressing her form, right, in this different material that he's abstracted, whether it be her physical form, maybe her psychological form, or the emotions that he's kind of getting through her facial expressions. He's taken that and tried to render it in this other material, the clay. So this brings us to the notion of expression in Langer's theory here, that what we have in this case, for instance, with Giacometti is expressive form, page 82. Any perceptible or imaginable whole that exhibits relationships of parts or points or even qualities or aspects within the whole so that it may be taken to represent some other whole whose elements have analogous relations. So here you have qualities, aspects, right, that Giacometti is creating in the clay, in his sculptural work, that can be taken to represent his wife, this other whole, this being, the living, existing Annette, right, who herself has these qualities, aspects that are analogous to what he's creating through his sculpture. So he is giving expressive form to this clay, and that expressive form is expressing the logical form of Annette. So here we have, if you take a look at this beautiful red couch, and you might think about its form. And you might even think about its function as well, because sometimes form and function go closely together. And then we have this over here, these red lips. And it's interesting because furniture designers have noticed that, it's interesting, one form in some way echoes the form of the other object here. So much so that what they've created is, by abstracting the form of one object and another and putting them together, rendering them in a different object altogether, they've created a sofa that simultaneously has this form slash function of what a sofa is supposed to do for us, where you can sit on it or lay on it, and renders also the form of red lips here. So Marilyn Monroe's lips here, at least in this case, pretty pricey sofa, what we find is that this one object expresses the form of the sofa on your left and the lips on your right. So an object can express more than one form, and you have it here in this wool upholstered sofa expressing the lips of Marilyn Monroe. So that brings us to an interesting question. If you remember, I like to, use my water bottle as an example, so I will continue to do that even in this online environment. So here you have the water bottle, and it has a form, and I want you to think about that form. I want to ask you a question with respect to it. So take, and remember, keep this in mind, what an expressive form is, on page 82. This is the quote you had in the previous slide. So take these two objects. You have on your left a novel by Camus, The Plague, which I highly recommend. Again, I just started a few days ago. Tremendous read so far, especially in these times. So that's to the left. Then you have to the right of the water bottle a battery. So I would ask you, knowing that, we can abstract form from the bottle and see it or perceive it in another object, which object here, the book or the battery, best expresses the form of this bottle? A, the book. B, the battery. Both express it equally. D, neither one of them express it. So take a moment. And now, think about some of the reasoning behind why you say one has better expresses the form than the other of the water bottle. The inclination might be to say, well, look, the battery is cylindrical and the water bottle is cylindrical. So therefore, the battery and the water bottle have similar forms. So maybe the battery expresses the form of the water bottle better. And in that case, I would say, yeah, okay, I could see that argument. And I can see that what you're pointing to is the physical shape as the form that we're talking about here. But what if we weren't talking about the physical shape? What if we were talking about maybe certain qualities, like color, for instance? So we have the black and white colors of the water bottle, the black and white colors of the novel cover. Here we have a similarity. Here we have a formal aspect, the simple quality of color that is expressed in both of these objects, but not in the battery. So maybe in this regard, the book expresses the form of the water bottle better. In fact, what you have is not only just black and white, but you have, if you can see from the cover, a kind of an illustration, if you will, suggestive, but nevertheless a representation of some natural occurring thing, a virus, with those little circles all around, at a kind of cellular level. And the water bottle has a representation of a naturally occurring thing, animals, right? The goat there, the bull there, the dog there, and there's a cat wrapped around the corner there. So maybe in that way, that these both are objects that represent or have some imagery on them that themselves represent some natural occurring phenomena. So maybe in that respect, the book here cover and the water bottle have express the same form, or we could say the book expresses the water bottle's form. Also, the book has pages in it, right? Sometimes we refer to books as volumes, and water bottles hold water within it. When we think of volume that the bottle might hold. So there again, so there's arguments for both ways. To say, look, well, the book expresses the form best, or the battery expresses that form best, and you might go back and forth about that. Here's the thing: it's not always intuitive which form you would be perceiving here, or which object would be perceived. Now, we'll get into that a little bit later about the sometimes it's not always intuitive, and what you need is a kind of way, a kind of context, a kind of way of translating which form you would be perceiving. If there's one form being expressed in another object, sometimes you need what's called a rule of translation, and we'll talk about that. Langer addresses this to help you see how that form is expressed in the object. Now, here I also want to point to how fascinating expressive form is, because think about, for instance, what an actor does, or even a mime here, right? One of those famous French mimes rendered here in a photograph. So an actor or a mime, for instance, will recreate through his or her gestures, through his or her expressions, through his or her body language, an environment, an activity. That they will give you the impression of something simply by the way in which they use their bodies and imagine situations, that you then are taken in to believe that they are really experiencing those things. And you can see, if a mime is pretending to be stuck in a glass that's not there, or behind a window pane or something like that, they're performing in such a way to give you the form of a window glass there, but obviously there's nothing right there, there's no material there, but they've been able to create that simply by rendering a kind of the forms that the body would take for that kind of experience to happen. And so you immediately recognize that, and you can see that, and you can relate to that, and you can perceive that simply through their gestures, simply through what they create before you. So I'll leave you with that as we move. We're going to continue with expressive form into the next video, and we'll pick it up there.